The charity gala at the Ashford estate was already in full chaos when Thea Calloway's body collided with Mrs. Cordelia Blackwell's, sending them both crashing into a $1,000 arrangement of white roses and orchids. Camera phones erupted in a constellation of flashes as 200 of Manhattan's elite watched a woman in a server's uniform tackle the most respected housekeeper in New York society. Garrett Ashford stood frozen on the grand marble staircase, his 7-year-old daughter Vivian trembling in his arms, her small fingers digging into his tuxedo jacket hard enough to wrinkle the silk. Blood traced a thin line down Thea's temple, where Mrs. Blackwell's ring had caught skin during the struggle. The older woman's carefully constructed silver bun had come undone, gray hair wild around a face that no longer held any pretense of gentility. She shrieked something about assault, about insanity, her cultured voice fracturing into raw fury. Security guards rushed the scene, but Garrett raised one hand, stopping them mid-stride. His voice cut through the pandemonium with the kind of authority that came from owning half the skyline visible through the mansion's floor-to-ceiling windows. Check the medicine cabinet. Check what this woman has been giving my daughter for the past 4 years. Thea remained on the floor, breathing hard, her server's uniform stained with chocolate from an overturned dessert tray. Her eyes never left Vivian's face, watching for any sign that the child understood what was happening, what had been done to her, what was finally being undone. Mrs. Blackwell's protest dissolved into incoherent rage as 2 FBI agents materialized from the crowd, moving with the practiced efficiency of law enforcement who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The screen went black. White text appeared against the void. But to understand how a waitress with $3 in her bank account ended up exposing Manhattan's most trusted housekeeper as a monster, we need to go back 6 weeks, to the day Thea Calloway's life changed forever. 6:15 on a Tuesday morning, and the Silver Spoon Diner in Brooklyn was already at war with itself. The kind of place where the coffee was always too hot and the eggs always too cold, where the linoleum tiles had given up trying to look clean somewhere around 1987. Thea moved through the breakfast rush with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned that efficiency was the only defense against exhaustion. The soles of her sneakers had worn through 2 weeks ago, thin enough now that every step on the hard floor sent small sparks of pain up through her heels. She balanced a tray loaded with 4 breakfast platters, weaving between tables packed with construction workers who smelled like cement dust and yesterday's beer. Her hair, dark brown and pulled into a ponytail so tight it made her scalp ache, was already coming loose. She'd been on her feet for 3 hours and had 9 more to go before her shift at the diner ended and her evening shift began. A man in a hard hat snapped his fingers at her as she passed, the sound sharp and demeaning. "Hey, sweetheart, where's my coffee? I've been sitting here forever." Thea's jaw tightened, but her voice remained level, professionally empty. "I'll bring it right away, sir." She delivered the platters to table 7 without spilling a drop, poured the coffee for the impatient construction worker, and made it back to the kitchen pass-through before her hands started shaking. Just a tremor, barely visible, but enough that she had to set down the empty tray and press her palms flat against the stainless steel counter until the trembling stopped. Vance Pritchard's voice cut through the kitchen noise like a dull blade through meat. "Thea, table 4 needs a refill. Table 9 is waiting on their check. And if you don't move faster, I'm docking your pay for the time you're wasting standing there." He stood in the kitchen doorway, 42 years old and shaped like a man who'd given up on himself around the same time the diner's tiles gave up on being clean. His shirt was already damp with sweat at the armpits, his face flushed with the particular anger of someone who hated his life and needed others to share the misery. "Yes, Mr. Pritchard." Thea watched him turn back to the kitchen, watched him pause at the counter where the staff tips jar sat. His hand moved quickly, practiced, transferring bills from the communal jar to his pocket with the casual theft of someone who'd been doing it so long he no longer bothered to check if anyone was watching. $15 vanished into his khakis, maybe 20, Hard to tell from this angle. Sophie, 19 and still naive enough to think fairness mattered, materialized at Thea's elbow. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He's stealing your tips again. You should say something." Thea picked up the coffee pot, the glass warm against her palm. "I need this job. But it's not right." "A lot of things aren't right. Doesn't mean we can change them." She moved back into the dining room, refilling cups, clearing plates, existing in that invisible space where servers lived. Present enough to be useful, invisible enough to be ignored. A skill she'd perfected over 2 years of double shifts and diminishing hope. The morning rush was starting to thin when the elderly man at table 12 stopped responding to his companion's conversation. His face went gray, the color draining so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. His hand clutched at his chest, fingers curling into a claw against his flannel shirt. The woman across from him screamed. Chairs scraped back. Someone yelled to call 911. Thea dropped the coffee pot she'd been holding. It shattered on the floor, but she was already moving, already running toward table 12, where the man had slumped sideways in his booth. She caught him before he hit the ground, her body remembering training from another life, from when she'd had a future instead of just survival. "Sir, can you hear me? Does your chest hurt?" His eyes were unfocused, but he managed a weak nod. She got him onto the floor, checking his pulse at the neck, finding it thready and irregular. Her hands moved through the motions without conscious thought. Tilt the head back. Check the airway. Position her hands over his sternum. Right placement, right angle. Ready to compress if the heart stopped completely. "Someone call 911. Her voice had changed, carrying an authority she'd never used with customers. The kind of command that came from medical training she'd abandoned 3 years ago. "Tell them possible myocardial infarction, male approximately 70 years old, conscious but deteriorating." The paramedics arrived 7 minutes later, which felt like 7 hours. They took over with professional efficiency, loading the man onto a gurney while his companions sobbed grateful prayers. One of the paramedics, a woman with kind eyes and tired shoulders, paused as they wheeled past Thea. "You probably saved his life. Are you a nurse?" Thea looked down at her stained apron, at the broken coffee pot still spreading across the floor in a dark puddle. "I used to study nursing." The paramedic's eyes showed recognition of all the stories behind those 4 words, all the dreams that started with "used to" instead of "am." She touched Thea's shoulder once, brief and understanding, then followed her partner out the door. Vance appeared with a mop and bucket, shoving both at Thea with enough force that she had to step back to avoid being hit. "Clean this mess up, and you're paying for that coffee pot. $12 out of your next check." Thea took the mop. There was no point arguing. There was never any point arguing with men like Vance Pritchard. Men who measured their worth by how much smaller they could make everyone around them. The evening shift ended at 11. Thea counted out her tips in the back room while Sophie watched from the doorway, young enough to still be angry about injustice, not yet beaten down enough to accept it. $287 for 2 weeks. Sophie's outrage was genuine, almost touching in its innocence. "That's not even minimum wage. He's been stealing from us for months." "I know." Thea folded the bills and tucked them into her bag, every dollar already allocated to debts she couldn't pay. "But I can't afford to lose this job over principal. Principal doesn't pay my mother's medical bills." She drove to Sunrise Memory Care Facility in a Honda Civic that was held together mostly by rust and optimism. The facility sat on the edge of a neighborhood that was trying to gentrify but hadn't quite committed, where old brownstones fought for space with new construction that already looked old. The night nurse buzzed her in without looking up from her phone. Rosalind Calloway sat in a chair by the window of her room, staring out at the parking lot like it held answers to questions she could no longer articulate. At 58, she looked 70, her hair gone completely white, her hands folded in her lap with the careful stillness of someone who'd forgotten how to initiate movement. Thea knelt beside the chair, taking one of those still hands in both of hers. "Hi, Mom. It's me. It's Thea." Rosalind's eyes drifted from the window to her daughter's face, recognition flickering like a candle in wind. Her voice came out soft and confused, reaching for a name that wasn't there. "Isabel? Is that you? You came back." The words hit like they always did, a small violence that Thea had learned to absorb without flinching. She squeezed her mother's hand gently, forcing her voice to remain steady. "It's me, Mom. It's Thea, your daughter." "Thea." Rosalind's face clouded with something that might have been sorrow or might have been nothing at all. "I had a daughter named Thea. She's gone now." Thea stayed kneeling there, holding her mother's hand, until the night director appeared in the doorway with the expression people wore when they had to deliver bad news they delivered 100 times before. "Miss Calloway, we need to talk about payment. You're $4,200 behind, and our policy only allows 60 days arrears. Without payment by Friday, we'll have to transfer your mother to county care." County care. The words were clinical, sterile, a bureaucratic euphemism for the place where people went to die slowly and alone. "Please." Thea stood, releasing her mother's hand carefully, like putting down something breakable. "Give me 2 more weeks. I'm working double shifts. I'll get the money." "I'm sorry." The decision came from corporate. Friday at noon, unless the account is settled in full. After the director left, Thea sat on the edge of her mother's bed, watching the woman who'd raised her stare at a parking lot she didn't recognize. Early onset Alzheimer's, the doctors had said 3 years ago, using words like aggressive progression and palliative care and quality of life. Words that meant, your mother is disappearing and there's nothing we can do except make it cost money you don't have. Thea had been in her 3rd year at Columbia, studying nursing, learning how to save people. The diagnosis had come the same week as her anatomy final. She'd taken a leave of absence that became permanent when the medical bills started arriving. When someone had to work and someone had to choose, and there was only one someone to do both. Her apartment waited for her in a building that should have been condemned, but somehow remained standing through spite and structural ignorance. The radiator clanked and hissed, providing more noise than heat, while Thea sat at the kitchen table that served as desk, dining area, and existential crisis headquarters. Bills spread across the surface like a paper monument to failure. Rent, $800, 3 weeks overdue. Food, she'd budgeted $200 a month and consistently spent less. Mother's care, $1,400 monthly, now 4 payments behind. Income from the diner, $1,100 on a good month. The math didn't work, had never worked. She'd been running the same calculation for 2 years, hoping that repetition would somehow change the answer, that if she just worked harder or slept less or wanted it enough, the numbers would align. They never did. She placed her head on the table, pressing her forehead against the cheap laminate, and allowed herself exactly 5 seconds of tears. Not grief, not despair, just the pure physical exhaustion of carrying weight that was slowly crushing her into smaller and smaller versions of herself. Then she lifted her head, dried her face with the heel of her hand, and started getting ready for bed. Tomorrow would bring another shift, another day of survival. It had to be enough because there was nothing else. The phone rang at 11:47, pulling her from sleep that hadn't quite arrived. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, local area code, but not one she recognized. Probably a bill collector who'd gotten her cell number, ready to make the same threats she'd already heard a dozen times. She answered anyway. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was male, deep, with the kind of controlled precision that came from boardrooms and corner offices. "Miss Calloway, this is Garrett Ashford. I have a proposition for you." Thea sat up in bed, her mind struggling to connect the name with context. Garrett Ashford, the man from the diner, the one whose daughter had thrown the milkshake, whose presence had cost her a job she couldn't afford to lose. Mr.
Ashford, how did you get this number?
I asked the diner owner, Miss Calloway, I need to speak with you about what happened today, about what you did. She almost laughed, bitter and tired. I got fired. If you're calling to apologize, it's unnecessary. And if you're calling to sue me for speaking to your daughter that way, I should tell you I have nothing worth taking. I'm calling to offer you a job. The words didn't make sense. Thea pressed the phone harder against her ear, as if proximity would clarify meaning. I'm a waitress, Mr. Ashford. I don't think I'm qualified for whatever. You treated my daughter like a human being who needed to learn accountability. That makes you more qualified than anyone I've hired in the past 4 years. Meet me tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, Bryant Park Fountain. I'll explain everything. He hung up before she could respond, leaving Thea staring at her phone in the darkness of her studio apartment, wondering if exhaustion had finally tipped over into hallucination. Bryant Park at 10 in the morning was full of people pretending they weren't rushing. Tourists with cameras and office workers with 15-minute coffee breaks, and pigeons who'd learned that persistence paid better than pride. Thea arrived 20 minutes early, partly from nervousness and partly because she'd taken 3 different subway lines to get there, and overcompensated for potential delays. She wore the only blazer she owned, purchased from a Goodwill in Queens 3 years ago, when she'd still had job interviews for positions she was qualified for. It didn't quite fit, and the elbows were worn thin, but it was clean, and it was professional, and it was all she had. Garrett Ashford arrived at exactly 10 o'clock, because men like him didn't run late. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Thea's annual rent, charcoal gray and perfectly tailored, but his face carried the kind of exhaustion that expensive clothes couldn't hide. He sat on the bench beside her, maintaining a respectful distance, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. Thank you for coming. I wasn't certain you would. You offered me a job. I'm $4,000 behind on my mother's medical bills, and I was fired yesterday. I'd have shown up if you'd asked me to meet you in New Jersey. A hint of something that might have been humor touched his mouth. Desperation makes for honest conversation. I appreciate that. Miss Calloway, I need someone to help with my daughter. Vivian is 7 years old, and she's been through 12 nannies in the past 6 months. They all quit, or I fire them because they can't handle her. She destroys their property, attacks them physically, makes their lives impossible until they leave. Thea watched a pigeon fight over a discarded pretzel near their feet. I'm not a therapist or a behavioral specialist. I'm not qualified to handle a child with those kinds of issues. No, but you handled her yesterday. You're also someone who studied nursing at Columbia. Someone who saved a man's life yesterday morning with CPR that was textbook perfect. Someone who's been working 2 shifts a day for 2 years to care for a mother who has early onset Alzheimer's. She turned to look at him directly, really seeing him for the first time. The tired eyes, the lines around his mouth that spoke of smiles he'd forgotten how to make. You investigated me. I did. I needed to know who you were before I made this offer. Thea Calloway, 26 years old, daughter of Rosalind Calloway, former nursing student who dropped out in her 3rd year when her mother was diagnosed. You've been working at the Silver Spoon for 2 years, living in a studio apartment in Sunset Park, surviving on a budget that barely covers food. You have $127 in your checking account and no savings. The invasion should have made her angry, but Thea was too tired for righteous indignation. If you know all that, then you know I'm desperate, which means you're either offering me legitimate work or you're about to proposition me for something else entirely. Legitimate work. $150,000 a year to be Vivian's full-time caretaker. Live-in position, room and board provided. Full autonomy over her daily care and education. You answer only to me. The number hit her like physical force. $150,000. More money than she'd made in the past 5 years combined. Enough to pay off her mother's bills, keep her at Sunrise, maybe even go back to school someday. Why me? You could hire someone with a PhD in child psychology, someone with decades of experience. Garrett's voice dropped, becoming something raw and honest. Because everyone I've hired treats Vivian like a project, a problem to solve, a behavioral disorder to manage. You treated her like a child who needed boundaries.
You made her clean up her own mess.
She's 7 years old, and that was the first time in 4 years anyone has held her accountable for her actions. What's wrong with her? Medically? He looked away toward the fountain where water caught morning light and turned it into brief diamonds. The doctors say severe behavioral disorder, possibly early onset bipolar with oppositional defiant tendencies. Her mother died 4 years ago when Vivian was 3. Lung cancer. It was fast and it was terrible, and Vivian doesn't remember much of her, which is either a mercy or another tragedy. I can't decide which. And you've been raising her alone? I've been traveling for business and leaving her with my housekeeper, Mrs. Cordelia Blackwell. Cordelia has been with my family for 20 years. She practically raised me after my parents died. She's been the only constant in Vivian's life, but even she can't control her anymore. That's why we keep hiring nannies, someone to help during the day, to give Cordelia breaks, to try new approaches. Thea processed this, fitting pieces together. Your housekeeper has been with you for 20 years, and she can't handle one 7-year-old? Vivian is not a normal 7-year-old. She's violent, manipulative, destructive. The last nanny left with a black eye and a broken phone. The one before that found all her clothes cut to pieces with scissors. Cordelia does her best, but she's 62 and exhausted. If I take this job, I need complete authority over Vivian's care. If your housekeeper has been the constant and things are this bad, then her methods aren't working. Garrett nodded slowly. In matters concerning Vivian's daily routine and discipline, you'll have full authority. Mrs. Blackwell manages the household staff and maintains the estate, but Vivian will be your responsibility. I need to see her first, your daughter, before I agree to anything. Of course, come to the estate tonight at 6. I'll introduce you properly, show you the house. If you decide to accept, you can start immediately. I'll provide a $5,000 signing bonus, paid today, to cover your mother's outstanding bills. $5,000. The exact amount she needed, offered without her having to ask. Either Garrett Ashford was genuinely trying to help, or he was very good at manipulation. The iron gates opened automatically as Thea's Uber approached, cameras tracking the vehicle with mechanical precision. The driver whistled low. Somebody really rich lives here. Apparently, she changed into clean jeans and a simple blouse, the nicest clothes she owned that weren't the Goodwill blazer. The marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that belonged in museums. The kind of wealth that was so complete, it became invisible to the people who lived with it. Mrs. Cordelia Blackwell descended the grand staircase like a queen granting audience to peasants. 62 years old, silver hair pulled back so severely it looked painful, wearing a gray suit that managed to be both elegant and threatening. Her eyes swept over Thea with the kind of assessment that found everything lacking. So, you're the way. Blackwell's smile could have cut glass. Of course. I'll have it sent to your room. Vivian is in the playroom, 3rd floor, east wing. Do try not to upset her. The last nanny left bleeding. She turned and glided away, leaving Thea standing in the massive foyer with Jenkins, who offered an apologetic grimace. Mrs. Blackwell takes her responsibilities very seriously. She's protective of Miss Vivian. I'm sure she is. The playroom looked like a tornado had achieved sentience and decided to redecorate. Broken toys scattered across expensive carpet, books with torn pages, a collection of dolls that had been systematically beheaded with what looked like kitchen scissors. In the center of this chaos sat Vivian Ashford, methodically destroying what remained of a Barbie collection that probably cost more than Thea's car. She looked up when Thea entered, recognition flashing across her face, followed immediately by defensive hostility. You, My father hired the waitress. That's pathetic. Thea didn't respond. She walked to a beanbag chair, kicked aside a headless doll, and sat down. From her bag, she pulled a paperback copy of Little Women, opened to chapter 3, and began reading. Vivian stared, confusion replacing hostility. What are you doing? Reading. You're supposed to tell me what to do, or try to play with me, or ask me about my feelings. Thea turned a page, keeping her eyes on the text. I'm not paid yet. Mr. Ashford hasn't finalized the contract, so right now I'm just existing in the same room as you. The little girl stood, scissors still clutched in one hand. The light caught the blades, sharp and dangerous in fingers too young to hold them. Get out! No. Vivian grabbed a wooden block from the scattered toys and threw it with surprising force. It missed Thea's head by less than an inch, hitting the wall behind her with a crack that left a mark in the expensive paint. Thea didn't look up from her book. You missed. The calm response seemed to infuriate Vivian more than fear would have. She screamed, a high, piercing sound of pure frustration, and grabbed a bottle of red paint from an overturned art table. I'm going to ruin your clothes. This blouse costs $4 at Goodwill. Go ahead. Vivian froze, the paint bottle raised but not thrown. Her whole strategy depended on other people caring about their possessions, about maintaining order, about being afraid. Thea cared about none of these things in this moment, and the power dynamic shifted so suddenly that the little girl visibly stumbled. She dropped the paint, breathing hard, staring at Thea with something that might have been curiosity or might have been the beginning of respect. Why aren't you afraid of me? Everyone is afraid of me. Thea finally closed her book and looked directly at Vivian, really seeing her for the first time. Dark circles under eyes too young to carry that kind of exhaustion. Hands that trembled slightly when she wasn't actively destroying something. A face that held anger like armor, because anger was safer than whatever lay beneath it. Because I know a secret. Vivian took a step closer, drawn in despite herself. What secret? I know you're not mean. I think you're just lonely, and I think you're really, really tired. For 1 second, maybe 2, the mask slipped. Vivian's lower lip trembled, and her eyes went wide with something that looked like recognition. Like someone had finally spoken a truth she'd been trying to hide, even from herself. Then the door creaked open. Mrs. Blackwell stood in the doorway, watching them with eyes that cataloged everything and revealed nothing. The moment shattered. Vivian's face hardened instantly, all vulnerability vanishing behind walls rebuilt in a heartbeat. She threw the scissors onto the floor with deliberate violence. I hate her. Daddy, she hit me. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Garrett appeared behind Mrs. Blackwell, still wearing his work clothes, his face tight with worry. Mrs. Blackwell's voice was silk over steel. I saw everything, Mr. Ashford. This woman threatened Vivian. Garrett looked at Thea, then at his daughter, then back at his housekeeper. The calculation in his eyes was visible, weighing accusations against evidence, trust against doubt. Thea stood, knowing how this would go. The housekeeper who'd served the family for 20 years versus the waitress he'd hired yesterday. There was no contest. Mr. Ashford, I understand if you don't believe me, but I didn't threaten her. I sat in a chair and read a book. Then came the small voice from behind them all, quiet but clear. She didn't hit me. Everyone froze. Vivian stood with her fists clenched, looking at the floor but speaking with a determination that seemed to cost her something. She didn't hit me. She just read a book. Mrs. Blackwell's expression flickered, control slipping for just a moment. Vivian, darling, you don't have to protect her if you're frightened. I want her to stay. Vivian looked up at her father with defiance burning in her eyes. I want the waitress to stay. Garrett let out a breath he'd been holding for what looked like years. He looked at Thea, and something in his face shifted, a decision made. You're hired. Can you start tonight? Thea looked at Mrs. Blackwell, saw the cold promise of war in those pale eyes. the calculation of someone whose territory had just been invaded. "I'll go pack my bag." Thea's room at the Ashford estate was larger than her entire apartment in Sunset Park, with windows that overlooked gardens maintained by people she would never meet, and a bathroom done in marble that stayed warm to the touch. The bed could have slept four. The closet was a room unto itself. Everything about the space whispered that she didn't belong here, that she was playing a role in someone else's life, wearing borrowed costumes in a theater she couldn't afford tickets to. She unpacked her single duffel bag in under 5 minutes. 3 changes of clothes, toiletries, the paperback novel, a photograph of her mother from before the diagnosis. Everything she owned that mattered fit into luggage meant for weekend trips. Mrs. Blackwell arrived at 7 in the morning with a binder thick enough to be a weapon. She set it on the antique desk with enough force to make a statement. Vivian's schedule, color-coded by activity: green for academics, blue for enrichment, yellow for physical therapy, red for medication times. Adherence is mandatory. The child thrives on structure. Thea flipped through pages of minute-by-minute scheduling. 8 o'clock medication. 8:15 breakfast, portion sizes specified. 8:45 French vocabulary drill. 9:15 violin practice. The day continued like this until 8 at night, when Vivian received her final medication and was put to bed. "This is for a 7-year-old? Mrs. Blackwell's smile held no warmth. "For a 7-year-old with severe behavioral issues. Without structure, she becomes unmanageable. I've spent 4 years developing this system. I expect you to follow it precisely." Thea closed the binder. She walked to the kitchen, found the trash compactor, and fed the entire schedule into the grinding mechanism. The motor whined as it consumed Mrs. Blackwell's 4 years of work in 30 seconds. The housekeeper's face went white, then red, cycling through emotions too quickly to track. "What do you think you're doing?" "Vivian is 7 years old. She doesn't need conjugation drills. She needs to play. Mr. Ashford will hear about this insubordination immediately." Thea poured herself coffee from the expensive machine that probably cost more than she'd earned all last year. "Good, tell him. But until he fires me, I'm in charge of Vivian. You're in charge of the furniture and the staff. Stay in your lane, Mrs. Blackwell." The older woman left without another word, but her footsteps on the marble stairs carried the weight of promises being made, strategies being formed. Jenkins appeared in the kitchen doorway, attempting to hide a smile behind professional neutrality. "That was either very brave or very foolish, Miss Calloway." "Probably both. Does the staff eat breakfast together?" "We do, in the kitchen at 6:30. You're welcome to join us." "I will. And Jenkins, it's just Thea." By the 4th morning, Thea had established a new pattern. She woke at 5, ran 3 miles through the estate grounds, while security cameras tracked her progress, showered, and joined the household staff for breakfast. There were 8 of them total: Jenkins the butler, 2 housekeepers named Maria and Claire, a cook called Mrs. Henshaw, a driver, 2 groundskeepers, and a part-time laundress. They were polite but cautious, waiting to see if she would last longer than the 12 nannies who'd preceded her. Mrs. Blackwell ate separately in her private quarters, maintaining the hierarchy that placed her above staff but below family. A liminal space she'd occupied for 20 years, powerful and isolated in equal measure. Vivian spent the first 3 days avoiding Thea with the dedication of someone executing a military strategy. If Thea entered a room, Vivian left. If Thea spoke, Vivian responded with silence so complete it felt aggressive. The child moved through the mansion like a ghost, present but unreachable, testing whether this new person would eventually disappear like all the others. On the morning of day 4, Thea observed Mrs. Blackwell administering Vivian's medication. The routine happened in the breakfast room, watched by no one because everyone had learned not to witness it. 3 pills lined up on a small silver dish, 1 pink, 2 white, each perfectly round and pharmaceutical. "Open, Vivian." The child opened her mouth mechanically, tongue out, waiting for pills to be placed like communion wafers. Mrs. Blackwell deposited all three, handed over a glass of water, watched until swallowing happened. Good girl, now finish your oatmeal. After Mrs. Blackwell left to manage some household crisis involving a broken fountain in the West Garden, Thea waited 10 minutes before going to Vivian's bathroom. The medicine cabinet held everything a child might need and several things a child should never have. She found the bottles behind the children's ibuprofen, labels facing backward, hidden in plain sight. Haloperidol, 5 milligrams, prescribed for severe behavioral control. Adult dosing, not pediatric. Bottle indicated 60 pills, refilled monthly. Clonazepam, 2 milligrams, for anxiety and seizures. Another adult medication, the kind that carried addiction warnings and black box labels. Risperidone, 1 milligram, antipsychotic, typically reserved for schizophrenia or severe bipolar disorder. Thea's nursing training kicked in with the clarity of emergency protocols. These weren't vitamins or mild supplements. This was a chemical cocktail designed to sedate, to suppress, to turn a human being into something manageable and quiet. The dosages were calibrated for someone 3 times Vivian's weight. Long-term use in a child this young would cause neurological damage, developmental delays, possibly permanent cognitive impairment. She photographed every label, every prescription notation, every doctor's signature. Dr. Jameson Whitmore, family physician. The dates showed refills going back 4 years, starting 6 months after Vivian's mother died. Her hands shook as she put the bottles back exactly as she'd found them. Someone had been chemically restraining a 3-year-old child, dosing her into compliance, manufacturing behavioral problems to justify the drugs that caused the behavioral problems. A perfect cycle of abuse disguised as treatment. The question was whether Mrs. Blackwell knew what she was doing or simply trusted a doctor who should have known better. Either way, the result was the same. A 7-year-old prisoner in her own mind, fighting against pharmaceutical chains she couldn't understand. Thea spent the afternoon researching withdrawal protocols for benzodiazepines and antipsychotics in pediatric patients. The medical literature was clear. Abrupt cessation could trigger seizures, psychosis, severe anxiety. The drugs had to be tapered slowly, carefully, under medical supervision. But involving doctors meant involving authorities, which meant investigations and custody battles and the kind of institutional machinery that moved slowly while children suffered. Garrett would fight it, Mrs. Blackwell would lawyer up, and Vivian would remain medicated throughout the legal process because courts defaulted to maintaining status quo. Thea made the decision alone in her oversized room, looking at photos of pill bottles on her phone. She would stop the medications herself, replace them with vitamins that looked similar enough to fool casual observation, and monitor Vivian around the clock for withdrawal symptoms. If anything went seriously wrong, she'd rush the child to an ER and deal with consequences later. It was risky and probably illegal, and definitely violated every protocol she'd learned in nursing school. But sometimes the right choice and the legal choice diverged, and you had to decide which master you served. She bought children's multivitamins from 3 different pharmacies in 3 different neighborhoods, paying cash, making sure no purchase created a pattern. The pills were close enough in size and color to pass inspection from someone who wasn't looking carefully. She practiced the swap in her bathroom, timing how long it took to open bottles, exchange contents, seal everything back up without leaving evidence. 2 minutes and 40 seconds. She'd have to be faster. The opportunity came on day 6, a Tuesday afternoon when Mrs. Blackwell left for her weekly trip to the main house in Southampton to inspect property the family rarely used. Jenkins drove her, leaving Thea alone with Vivian and the household staff, who had learned not to question what happened above their pay grade. Thea went to the medicine cabinet and performed surgery on pharmaceutical bottles, hands steady with purpose, even as her mind screamed warnings about jail time and malpractice and child endangerment charges. The real pills went into a Ziploc bag that she hid in her room. The vitamins went into the prescription bottles, arranged to match the patterns she'd photographed. That evening, she administered the fake medication herself, standing in for Mrs. Blackwell's ritual. Vivian took the pills without question, so accustomed to the routine that she didn't look at what entered her mouth. "Good job, you can go play now." Vivian's eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise. Playing wasn't on the schedule. Playing was something other children did. Children who weren't being prepared for futures that required French fluency and violin proficiency before third grade. The first 2 days of withdrawal were exactly as terrible as the medical literature predicted. Vivian became irritable, anxious, unable to sleep despite obvious exhaustion. She threw a crystal vase at the wall on day 7, screamed for 40 minutes straight on day 8 when Thea tried to give her breakfast. The physical symptoms were worse: tremors in her hands, nausea that made eating impossible, headaches that left her curled in a ball on her bedroom floor. Thea monitored vital signs every 4 hours, checking pupil dilation, reflexes, orientation to time and place. She slept on a cot in Vivian's room, waking at every sound, ready for the seizure or psychotic break that medical journals said could happen. Mrs. Blackwell noticed the behavioral deterioration immediately. She appeared in Vivian's playroom on day 9 with the expression of someone whose predictions had come true. This is what happens when you disrupt established routines. The child needs structure and medication, not indulgence. Thea was helping Vivian build a fort out of pillows, the first constructive activity the girl had initiated in a week. She's adjusting to a new schedule. It takes time. It takes medication. I'll speak with Mr. Ashford about reinstating Dr. Whitmore's prescriptions immediately. You do that. But Mrs. Blackwell didn't leave. She stood watching them with an expression Thea couldn't decode, something calculating behind the concern. On day 10, Thursday afternoon, the sky opened with the kind of rain that turned Manhattan into a watercolor painting of itself. Vivian sat in the solarium, wearing a velvet dress that probably cost more than Thea had spent on clothes in her entire life, staring out at gardens being beaten into submission by weather. Thea walked in wearing jeans and a hooded sweatshirt, both purchased from Target with her first week's pay. "Come on." Vivian didn't turn from the window. "Where?" "Outside. We're jumping in puddles." Now the child looked, confusion replacing the listless exhaustion that had characterized her for days. "We're not allowed outside when it rains. Mrs. Blackwell says we'll catch pneumonia and die." "Mrs. Blackwell isn't here. And rain is just water that hasn't hit the ground yet. It dries." Thea grabbed 2 raincoats from the mudroom, adult sizes both, tossed one at Vivian. The girl caught it by reflex, those tremoring hands more steady than they'd been in days. For a long moment, Vivian just held the raincoat, face cycling through emotions. Fear of breaking rules, desire to please the authority figure who wasn't there, longing for something she couldn't name. Then Thea opened the French doors, and the smell of wet earth and ozone flooded the sterile room. And whatever internal debate Vivian was having resolved itself. They went outside together. For 20 minutes, they existed in a world without rules or schedules or pharmaceutical intervention. They stomped in puddles, sending water arcing into air that was already saturated. Thea showed Vivian how to find earthworms displaced by rain, how to cup them gently and relocate them to higher ground. Vivian slipped on mud and went down hard, face first into a puddle, ruining the velvet dress completely. She lay there for a second, stunned, waiting for the punishment that always followed mistakes. Thea knelt beside her in the mud, not helping her up, just being present. 10 points for style, 0 for landing. Vivian blinked water from her eyes. Then a sound emerged from her throat that hadn't been there before, rusty and uncertain like machinery starting after years of disuse. A giggle. Small and fragile but unmistakably real, the laugh of a child who remembered briefly what it meant to be a child. They walked back inside 20 minutes later, dripping and muddy and shivering from cold that felt good. that felt earned. Their laughter died when they saw who was waiting in the kitchen. Garrett stood by the island in his work suit, having come home early for reasons not yet explained. Mrs. Blackwell stood beside him, her expression a masterpiece of controlled triumph. Mrs. Blackwell's voice carried the weight of someone presenting evidence to a jury. "You see, sir, I told you she's endangering the child's health. Look at them, filthy, soaked to the bone, risking illness for the sake of indulgent chaos." Garrett's face was unreadable, a CEO's mask that revealed nothing. He looked at his daughter, at the mud caking her ruined dress, at the water pooling on his expensive Italian tile floor. "She's drenched." His voice was low, dangerous in its quietness. He turned his gaze to Thea, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Genuine anger, the kind that came from fear. "What were you thinking?" "We were playing. She's 7 years old. 7-year-olds play in the rain." Mrs. Blackwell stepped forward, voice dripping with false concern. "Sir, Vivian has a weak immune system. She was hospitalized for pneumonia last year when a previous nanny allowed her to get chilled. This is criminal negligence." Garrett's jaw tightened. He looked at Thea with something close to betrayal. "Is that true? About the pneumonia?" "I didn't know about any hospitalization, but she's fine. We were outside for 20 minutes. Her core temperature is normal. Her breathing is clear. She's experiencing normal physical responses to mild cold exposure." "You're not a doctor. You're not even a nurse. You dropped out of nursing school, which means you have no credentials to make medical assessments about my daughter's health." The words landed like slaps, accurate and cruel. Vivian stood between them, her momentary joy evaporating, the weight of being the object of conflict settling back onto shoulders too small to carry it. Garrett's voice was final. "Go change her. Make sure she's warm and dry. Then meet me in my study." Mrs. Blackwell's smile was subtle but unmistakable, the expression of someone who'd won a battle and knew it. Thea took Vivian's hand and led her upstairs, feeling the child's fingers tighten around hers with something close to desperation. In Vivian's bathroom, Thea helped her out of the ruined dress and into warm pajamas, toweling her hair dry with gentle efficiency. The girl was silent, body tense, waiting for the inevitable. Finally, she spoke, voice small. "He's going to fire you." Thea wrapped the towel around Vivian's shoulders, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "I'm not going anywhere." Everyone leaves when Mrs. Blackwell tells on them. She always wins. She tells Daddy things and he believes her, and then the nannies go away. I'm not a nanny, and I don't lose to people like Mrs. Blackwell. You don't know her. She's really good at making people leave. Thea turned Vivian around to face her directly, kneeling so they were at eye level. "Put on your warm pajamas. Watch a movie or read a book, or destroy some toys if it makes you feel better. I'll handle your dad." She found Garrett in his study, a room designed to intimidate with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and massive desk, and windows overlooking the city he partially owned. He was pouring scotch from a crystal decanter, his back to the door when she entered without knocking. "You have no idea how fragile she is, Thea. You don't understand what it's like to watch a child fight for breath, to sit in an ER while doctors work to keep her lungs functioning. Her mother died of respiratory illness. I cannot lose Vivian to the same thing because someone thought playing in the rain was more important than her safety." His voice cracked on the last words, revealing the fear beneath the anger. Thea felt something in her chest soften, understanding that his rage came from a place of trauma, from watching someone he loved die slowly while medicine failed. But understanding didn't mean accepting. "You're losing her right now." He turned, glass in hand, face set in hard lines. "Excuse me? You're so worried about her lungs that you're ignoring her spirit. You're so focused on keeping her alive that you're forgetting to let her live. That little girl is terrified of you, Garrett. She thinks you hate her." "I give her everything." The shout came from somewhere deep, raw, and painful. He slammed the glass down hard enough that scotch slopped over the rim. This house, the best education money can buy, private tutors, every opportunity. What more could I possibly give? Thea stepped closer, refusing to be intimidated by his size, or his wealth, or his grief. You give her things, objects, schedules, structure, but you don't give her you. You're never here. You're always traveling for business, leaving her with a woman who runs this house like a prison. Mrs. Blackwell has been with this family for 20 years. She practically raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 9. She's the only stable presence Vivian has known since Isabel died. Then she did a terrible job raising you. The words came out harder than Thea intended, but she didn't take them back. Because you're blind to what's happening in your own house. Garrett took a step toward her, voice dropping to something dangerous and quiet. Careful. Mrs. Blackwell doesn't care about Vivian. She cares about control. She keeps your daughter scared and isolated and dependent so she remains essential. So she keeps her job and her power and her place in this family. Vivian giggled today, Garrett. She laughed like a normal child. When was the last time you heard her laugh? The question hung between them, unanswered because they both knew he couldn't remember. His anger drained visibly, replaced by something worse. A bone-deep weariness that came from fighting battles he didn't know how to win. I don't know how to talk to her. His voice was barely above a whisper. Every time I try, she screams or runs away or looks at me like I'm a stranger she's afraid of. I'm her father, and she doesn't know me. Thea's voice gentled, recognizing the moment for what it was. A man admitting defeat to someone he barely knew because he had no one else to tell. That's because she's being medicated, Garrett. Those aren't vitamins Mrs. Blackwell gives her 3 times a day. His head snapped up, shock replacing grief. What? She pulled out her phone, showed him the photographs of pill bottles with their damning labels. His face went pale as he read, thumb scrolling through images of haloperidol and clonazepam and risperidone, medications that should never be given to a 7-year-old child. Dr. Whitmore prescribed vitamins and a mild focus supplement. He said they would help with her behavioral issues. Who administers the pills? Garrett's voice had gone hollow. Cordelia. She's given them to Vivian every day since Isabel died. She said it was doctor's orders, that it was the only thing keeping Vivian from hurting herself or others. These drugs don't prevent self-harm. They suppress personality. They turn children into zombies who are easier to manage. I stopped giving them to her 6 days ago. The irritability and anxiety you're seeing, that's withdrawal. But today, for the first time since I arrived, she acted like a normal 7-year-old. She played and laughed and got muddy, and it was beautiful. Garrett sat down heavily in his desk chair, still holding the phone, staring at evidence of betrayal by someone he'd trusted his entire adult life. His hands were shaking. Why would Cordelia do this? She loved Isabel. She's been loyal to this family for 2 decades. I don't know. Maybe she genuinely thought she was helping. Maybe Dr. Whitmore convinced her it was necessary. But the result is the same. Your daughter has been chemically sedated for 4 years, and her behavioral problems are likely caused by the drugs that are supposed to treat them. My God. He looked up at Thea, and she saw something break in his expression, the final defense crumbling. What have I done? What have I allowed to happen? You didn't know, but you know now. The question is what we do about it. He stood, pacing the length of his study like a caged animal, looking for escape routes that didn't exist. We need to involve authorities, Child Protective Services, the medical board, the police. If Cordelia has been drugging a child without proper medical justification, then she lawyers up and the case drags on for months, while Vivian stays medicated because courts move slowly and default to status quo. You'll fight her in depositions and hearings while your daughter remains exactly where she is now. Garrett stopped pacing, looked at her with something close to desperation. Then what do? We gather evidence. Real evidence, not just my word against Mrs. Blackwell's. We find out if Dr. Whitmore knowingly prescribed inappropriate medications or if someone forged his prescriptions. We document everything quietly and carefully, and then we strike fast enough that she can't mount a defense. How long will that take? A week, maybe 2. I need to monitor Vivian through the worst of withdrawal anyway. If we move too fast and she has a medical emergency, Mrs. Blackwell can claim I caused it by stopping necessary medication. He walked to the window, looking out at the city he commanded in business, but couldn't protect his daughter from in his own home. I'm trusting you. A woman I've known for less than 2 weeks. This is insane. Yes, but sometimes the right choice looks insane from the outside. He turned back to her, and something in his face had changed. The CEO mask was gone, replaced by raw humanity. Why are you doing this? You barely know us. You could walk away right now, take your signing bonus, find a job that doesn't involve pharmaceutical conspiracies and family dysfunction. Thea thought about her mother forgetting her name, about working double shifts for tips that got stolen, about the 1,000 small indignities that came with being poor and powerless. Because nobody should be trapped the way Vivian is trapped. And because when I look at her, I see myself at 7 years old, alone, scared, waiting for someone to notice I was drowning. Garrett crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. He took her hands in his, the gesture intimate and desperate and entirely inappropriate for an employer touching an employee. But in that moment, they weren't employer and employee. They were 2 people trying to save a child from something neither fully understood yet. Thank you for seeing what I couldn't see. The study door slammed open hard enough to bounce off the wall. Mrs. Blackwell stood in the doorway, face composed but eyes blazing with something cold and calculating. Mr. Ashford, I must speak with you privately about Miss Calloway's conduct. Immediately. She saw their joined hands, and her expression flickered, control slipping for half a second before reasserting itself. Garrett dropped Thea's hands, but didn't step back, a small act of defiance that Mrs. Blackwell definitely noticed. Cordelia, we need to discuss Vivian's medications. The housekeeper's voice remained smooth, practiced. Of course, sir. I administer them exactly as Dr. Whitmore prescribed. Is there a problem? Thea spoke before Garrett could. Yes, they're not vitamins. Mrs. Blackwell's gaze shifted to Thea, and for a moment the mask dropped completely. Pure venom showed through, hatred so intense it was almost physical. Then the professional facade snapped back into place. Sir, has this woman been filling your head with conspiracy theories? She's a waitress with no medical credentials whatsoever. Her opinions on pharmaceutical matters are worth less than nothing. Garrett's voice was firm, controlled. She studied nursing, and she's correct that haloperidol is not a vitamin. When did Dr. Whitmore prescribe antipsychotics for my daughter? Mrs. Blackwell recalibrated, switching tactics. After the incident with Nanny number 11, the one Vivian attacked with scissors. You were traveling in Singapore, sir. Dr. Whitmore and I made the decision to protect Vivian from herself and others. The medications calm her, prevent her from causing harm. They turn her into a zombie. They keep her safe. Mrs. Blackwell's voice had steel beneath the silk now. But if you'd prefer to wait until she seriously injures someone or herself, by all means, listen to a dropout who's been here 10 days instead of someone who's dedicated 20 years to this family. Garrett moved to his desk, opened a drawer, pulled out a legal pad. He wrote something quickly and handed it to Mrs. Blackwell. Call Dr. Whitmore. I want him here tomorrow morning to explain these prescriptions in detail. I want to see every medical justification, every diagnostic test, every reason he had for putting a 3-year-old on adult psychiatric medications. If he can't provide that documentation, I'm finding a new family physician. Mrs. Blackwell took the note, her face a mask of professional concern. Of course, sir. I'm sure Dr. Whitmore will be happy to clarify everything. He's always had Vivian's best interests at heart. She left without acknowledging Thea, closing the door with careful precision. After her footsteps faded down the hallway, Garrett turned to Thea with exhaustion written across every line of his face. She's going to retaliate. I know, but we've pushed her into a corner now. She has to either produce legitimate medical documentation or admit the prescriptions were unjustified. Either way, we learn something. And if she produces documentation, if Dr. Whitmore backs her up, Thea met his eyes, then we know he's either incompetent or complicit, and we take the evidence to the medical board. Either way, Vivian wins. That night, Thea woke to screaming. She was on her feet before fully conscious, running down the hall to Vivian's room, where the child sat upright in bed, eyes wide with terror, drenched in sweat. "Mommy, don't go. Please don't go." Thea sat on the bed, pulling Vivian into her arms. The girl fought briefly, still trapped in nightmare logic, then collapsed against Thea's chest with sobs that shook her entire small body. "Shh, you're okay. It was just a dream. You're safe. My mommy was here, and then she went away again, and I couldn't stop her. I tried to hold on, but she turned into smoke." Thea rocked her gently, the way her own mother used to comfort her before Alzheimer's stole those memories. She started humming a lullaby, something her mother had sung, a melody so embedded in childhood it required no conscious recall. Vivian's sobs quieted. Her voice was sleepy, confused. "That song, my mommy used to sing that." Thea's humming stopped. "She did?" "When I was really little, before she got sick, before everything got scary. It's a common lullaby. Lots of mothers sing it." Vivian was already drifting back towards sleep, the exhaustion of withdrawal and nightmares pulling her under. "Are you going to be my new mommy?" The question hit Thea like a punch to the chest. "No, sweetheart, but I'll always keep you safe, I promise." Everyone promises, then they leave. "I won't leave, not unless you want me to." Vivian was asleep before she could respond, her breathing evening out into the deep rhythm of childhood rest. Thea stayed on the bed, holding her, watching moonlight paint shadows across expensive furniture and custom wallpaper. She didn't see Mrs. Blackwell in the doorway, didn't know the housekeeper had been standing there for the past 2 minutes, watching with eyes that calculated and planned and promised retribution. The next morning, Thea visited her mother at Sunrise Memory Care. The facility felt different now that she had money in the bank, now that the constant panic about payment had eased. The nurses were the same, the building was the same, but Thea carried herself differently when she wasn't drowning. Rosalind was having one of her rare lucid periods, sitting in the common room with a book she wasn't reading. She looked up when Thea entered, and something like recognition crossed her face. "Thea, baby, you look different." "Happier?" Thea sat beside her mother, taking her hand. "I got a new job, a good one. You're going to stay here, no county hospital." "That's good. That's really good." Rosalind squeezed her daughter's hand with surprising strength. "Thea, listen to me. I need to tell you something while I can still remember it." "What is it, Mom?" "The Ashford family. You said you're working for them?" Thea went very still. "How did you know that?" "Because I know things. Isabel told me things before she died." Rosalind's eyes were clearer than they'd been in months, focused with an urgency that felt important. "Be careful, baby. That housekeeper, the cold woman with silver hair, Isabel was afraid of her." "Mrs. Blackwell? Why was Isabel afraid?" "She was controlling, obsessive. After Garrett's parents died, she raised him, and she never let go. Isabel said it was like living with a mother-in-law who thought she owned the family. And after Vivian was born, it got worse. Cordelia wanted to control how the baby was raised, what she ate, who held her. Isabel was going to fire her. She told me that 2 months before she died." Thea leaned forward, heart pounding. "Mom, how did you know Isabel Ashford?" Rosalind's face showed confusion, the clarity starting to fade. She was my patient, no, my friend, or both? I get confused now. But I remember she was scared. She said Cordelia was giving Vivian medicine to make her sleep, and when Isabel tried to stop it, Cordelia said Garrett had approved it. But Garrett was always traveling. He didn't know what was happening in his own house. Mom, what else did Isabel tell you? But Rosalind's eyes were clouding again, the lucidity draining away like water through cupped hands. I'm tired. Where's my daughter? Is Thea coming to visit today? I'm here, Mom. I'm right here. A nurse appeared with a medication card, smiling professionally. Time for your afternoon pills, Mrs. Calloway. She handed Rosalind a small paper cup with pills inside, followed by water. Rosalind took them obediently, the routine so practiced she didn't need consciousness to complete it. Thea watched her mother swallow, watched the nurse mark something on a chart. Then Rosalind began to convulse. It started with tremors in her hands, spreading rapidly to her whole body. Her eyes rolled back, showing whites, and foam appeared at the corners of her mouth. The book she'd been holding fell to the floor. Thea was already moving, already yelling, "She's seizing! Someone call 911!" She got her mother on the floor in recovery position, protecting her head, timing the seizure on her phone. 90 seconds. 2 minutes. The convulsions should have stopped by now. Other nurses rushed in. Someone was calling emergency services. Someone else was checking vital signs. The paramedics arrived in 4 minutes, which felt like 40. They loaded Rosalind onto a gurney, starting an IV, administering emergency anti-seizure medication. Thea rode in the ambulance, holding her mother's hand, watching monitors that showed a heart rate too fast and blood pressure too high. At the hospital, a doctor with tired eyes and efficient hands examined Rosalind, while Thea provided medical history. Has she had seizures before? Never. She has Alzheimer's, but no history of epilepsy or seizure disorders. We're going to run a full toxicology panel. The presentation suggests possible poisoning rather than spontaneous seizure activity. 2 hours later, the doctor returned with results and a detective. The detective introduced himself as Martinez, Homicide Division, which seemed wrong because Rosalind wasn't dead. Miss Calloway, we found arsenic in your mother's system. Not a lethal dose, but significant. Chronic exposure over several days or weeks. Can you tell me who has access to your mother's food and medication? Thea's mind was racing, trying to process information that didn't make sense. The nursing staff at Sunrise. But they're professionals, they're licensed. Why would they poison her? Detective Martinez pulled out an evidence bag containing a water pitcher. This was in your mother's room. Your fingerprints are on it. The lab found traces of arsenic trioxide in the water. Of course my fingerprints are on it. I visit her every other day. I pour her water. That doesn't mean I poisoned her. You're also the sole beneficiary of your mother's life insurance policy. $100,000. That's motive. The accusation was so absurd it almost made Thea laugh. I've been working myself to death to keep her alive. Why would I poison her for insurance money I could get more easily by just stopping payments and letting the county hospital handle end-of-life care? People do strange things when they're desperate, and according to Sunrise's records, you were $4,000 behind on payments until 10 days ago, when you suddenly paid everything off in full. Where did that money come from? My employer, Garrett Ashford. He gave me a signing bonus when I started working for him, Martinez wrote in his notebook. We'll need to verify that. In the meantime, Miss Calloway, you're under arrest for attempted murder. The handcuffs were cold against her wrists, metal biting into skin as Martinez read her rights. Thea's mind fragmented into 1,000 pieces, trying to understand how saving Vivian from pharmaceutical abuse had led to being accused of poisoning her own mother. Someone had done this. Someone had poisoned Rosalind and planted evidence pointing to Thea. Someone who knew about the life insurance, about the overdue bills, about her fingerprints on the water pitcher. Mrs. Blackwell had been at sunrise yesterday. Thea had seen her leaving as she arrived, had thought nothing of it at the time because wealthy families often visited their staff members' relatives as a gesture of noblesse oblige. But it hadn't been a gesture. It had been reconnaissance, preparation, setting up a frame so perfect it would destroy Thea while looking like justice. They put her in a holding cell at the 19th precinct. The walls were cinder block, painted institutional beige. The bench was metal and cold. And time moved differently in confinement, stretching and contracting until hours felt like minutes, felt like days. She used her one phone call to contact Sunrise, begging them not to transfer her mother to county hospital while she was unable to visit. No one answered. She left a message that probably wouldn't be returned. At midnight, the cell door opened and Garrett walked in, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He stood there staring at her, and Thea couldn't read his expression, couldn't tell if he'd come to help or to confirm she was exactly what Mrs. Blackwell had probably told him she was. The police found sterling silver from my dining room in your bag when they searched your room at the estate. Antique pieces worth $15,000. Thea's voice came out flat, exhausted. I didn't take them. I've never even been in your dining room. Mrs. Blackwell discovered them during a routine inspection. She reported them immediately to estate security, who called the police. Of course she did, because she planted them, Garrett, just like she poisoned my mother and planted evidence pointing to me. She's destroying me because I'm exposing what she did to Vivian. He pulled over a folding chair and sat, elbows on knees, face in hands. I want to believe you. God, I want to. But there's evidence, Thea, physical evidence. Your fingerprints, your motive, items from my house in your possession. What about Vivian? What about the pills? Did Dr. Whitmore show up to explain the prescriptions? He came this morning. He had documentation for everything. Charts showing Vivian's behavioral incidents, psychiatric evaluations justifying the medications, signed consent forms that I apparently gave him 3 years ago when I was traveling in Japan. You don't remember signing them? I sign hundreds of documents a month. He could have slipped them into a stack of business contracts and I wouldn't have noticed. Or he could have forged my signature. I don't know anymore. I don't know what's real. Thea stood, crossing to the cell bars, gripping them hard enough to hurt. What's real is that your daughter was laughing yesterday for the first time in years. What's real is that the drugs were destroying her, and now she's getting better. What's real is that someone tried to kill my mother to shut her up, and that someone has been in your house for 20 years. Or what's real is that you stopped necessary medications, and Vivian is experiencing a temporary behavioral improvement that won't last. And you're trying to deflect from theft and attempted murder by creating conspiracy theories about my housekeeper. The words hurt more than the arrest, more than the handcuffs, because they came from someone she thought might understand. You're going to leave me here. You're going to go home and let Mrs. Blackwell put Vivian back on those pills, and in 6 months my mother will be dead, and I'll be in prison, and your daughter will be exactly where she was before I arrived. Garrett stood, the chair scraping against concrete. He looked at her with something that might have been regret or might have been relief at dodging a bullet. I have to think about Vivian's safety. I'm sorry. He left. The cell door locked behind him with a sound like finality, like every door that had ever closed in Thea's life, leaving her alone with consequences she didn't deserve for choices she'd had to make. She lay down on the metal bench and stared at the ceiling, and tried not to think about Vivian waking up tomorrow to find another person gone, another promise broken, another confirmation that no one stayed. The holding cell became a geometry problem in waiting. 12 feet by 8, metal bench bolted to the wall, toilet without a seat, time measured in the fluorescent flicker of overhead lights that never fully turned off. Thea counted ceiling tiles until the numbers lost meaning, then started over, needing the distraction of mathematics to keep from thinking about Vivian waking to find her gone. 3 hours passed before exhaustion dragged her into something approximating sleep. She woke to the sound of the cell door opening and a guard announcing that bail had been posted. At 3 in the morning, that made no sense. She'd called no one, had no one to call. The processing took 40 minutes, returning her belongings, paperwork she signed without reading, warnings about court dates and travel restrictions. When she finally walked into the precinct lobby, Garrett stood waiting near the exit, looking like he'd aged a decade since leaving her cell 6 hours ago. "I'm posting bail. My lawyer is handling the paperwork." Thea's voice came out raw from hours of not speaking. "Why?" "Because I went home and couldn't sleep. Because I sat in Vivian's room watching her breathe and remembered how she looked yesterday in the rain, how real she seemed. Because I opened my wife's jewelry box looking for something to remember her by, and I found a letter I'd never seen before." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, cream-colored paper with handwriting that looked feminine, careful. The envelope was addressed to Garrett in fountain pen, the ink slightly faded. "Isabel wrote this before she died. I don't know why I never found it, or maybe I did and couldn't bear to read it, but tonight I read it. And everything you've been trying to tell me makes sense now." They walked to his car, a black Mercedes that the driver had waiting at the curb. Inside the privacy of the back seat, Garrett turned on the interior light and handed her the letter. The paper was expensive, the kind that came from stationers who still believed in quality. Thea unfolded it carefully, aware she was holding something precious and private, a message from the dead. "My dearest Garrett, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry. I wanted to watch Vivian grow up, wanted to grow old with you, wanted so many things that cancer took away. But I need you to know the truth about how I survived these extra 2 years with you and our daughter. In 2018, when the doctor said I had 3 months left, a woman saved my life. Her name is Rosalind Calloway. She was a nurse at Sterling Memorial, and when they tested the staff for bone marrow matches, she came back as perfect. She donated to me without hesitation, refused any payment, said she did it because every mother deserves to see her daughter grow up. Rosalind has a daughter too, Thea, beautiful girl, studying nursing at Columbia, so much like her mother, kind and selfless and stronger than she knows. Garrett, I made Rosalind a promise. If anything happens to me, if Thea ever needs help, you must protect her the way Rosalind protected me. Our families are bound by more than gratitude now, by life itself. I'm also writing this because I'm frightened. Cordelia has been acting strange since my diagnosis. She's too controlling of Vivian, inserting herself into decisions that should be ours alone. When I asked her to give us space, she became angry in a way I've never seen. She said things like, "I know what's best for this family," and "You're too weak to raise her properly." Yesterday, I caught her crushing pills into Vivian's milk. When I demanded to know what she was giving our daughter, she said you'd approved it, that it helps her sleep. But you were in Singapore. You couldn't have approved anything. I confronted her, Garrett. I told her I wanted her to leave, to find another family to serve. She looked at me with such hatred that I actually felt afraid in my own home. She said I was ungrateful, that she'd sacrificed her life for this family, that she wasn't going anywhere. 2 weeks later, my cancer came back with a vengeance. The doctors were surprised. I'd been responding so well to treatment. Now suddenly I'm failing fast, and I can't help wondering. I sound paranoid. Forget I wrote this. I'm sick and frightened and not thinking clearly. But if I die, please don't let Cordelia raise Vivian alone. She's loyal to you, but there's something cold at her core, something that loves control more than people. And if you ever meet Rosalind's daughter Thea, protect her. Promise me, Garrett, the way Rosalind gave me life, you give her safety if she needs it. Always yours, Isabel. Thea's hands were shaking by the time she finished. She looked up at Garrett and saw tears tracking down his face, the first time she'd seen him cry. Your mother saved my wife, gave her 2 more years of birthdays and Christmases and bedtime stories. 2 more years of Vivian having a mother. His voice broke completely. And Isabel tried to warn me. She knew something was wrong with Cordelia. But I was traveling. I was building the business. I was too busy to read letters from my dying wife. You couldn't have known. I should have known. I should have seen. Isabel was afraid of Cordelia. And 6 months after writing this letter, she was dead. The cancer came back fast, the doctor said. Too fast. Aggressive recurrence despite successful treatment. Thea's medical training connected dots she didn't want to see. Arsenic poisoning can mimic cancer symptoms, especially in someone already compromised by chemotherapy. Organ failure, weight loss, pain that doesn't respond to treatment. Garrett's face went white. You think Cordelia killed Isabel? I think your wife was about to fire her. I think Mrs. Blackwell had spent 20 years building her identity around being essential to your family. And I think when Isabel threatened that, she eliminated the threat. We need to go to the police. Show them this letter, tell them everything. With what evidence? A letter expressing vague concerns isn't proof of murder. Mrs. Blackwell will claim Isabel was paranoid from medication, that the pills she gave Vivian were prescribed by Dr. Whitmore, that everything she's done has been with your approval. She'll have paperwork and witnesses and 20 years of loyal service to point to. Garrett slumped back in the seat, looking defeated. Then what do? We find proof, real, undeniable proof, and we need to do it before she realizes we know the truth. The driver pulled up to the Ashford estate. Every window was dark except for Mrs. Blackwell's quarters on the second floor, where a single lamp burned like a watchful eye. They entered through the kitchen, keeping their voices low. Jenkins appeared from the butler's pantry, a man whose job required him to be available at all hours for any emergency. Mr. Ashford, Miss Calloway, is everything all right? Garrett's voice was steady despite everything. We need access to Mrs. Blackwell's office, the small one off the pantry that she uses for household accounts. Jenkins hesitated, loyalty to the housekeeper warring with loyalty to his employer. Finally, he reached into his vest pocket and produced a ring of keys. I should tell you that Mrs. Blackwell keeps that room locked. She's very particular about her records, which is exactly why we need to see them. The office was smaller than a closet, barely large enough for a desk and filing cabinet. Mrs. Blackwell kept it obsessively organized. Folders labeled by category, ledgers dated and cross-referenced, everything in its designated place. The space smelled like old paper, and the lavender perfume she wore, cloying and medicinal. Thea started with the filing cabinet while Garrett examined the desk. She found household expense reports going back a decade, maintenance logs, staff schedules, grocery receipts organized by date, the mundane documentation of running a large estate, nothing suspicious on the surface. Then she found the folder labeled Medical, Vivian. Inside were prescription records, doctor's notes, pharmacy receipts. Everything looked legitimate until Thea started checking dates against her knowledge of Vivian's timeline. The first haloperidol prescription was dated 4 months after Isabel's death, when Vivian was 3 years old. The reason listed: severe aggressive behavior following maternal loss, danger to self and others. But stapled behind that prescription was a handwritten note on Dr. Whitmore's letterhead, dated 2 weeks earlier. The handwriting was different from the prescription, more feminine and precise. Dr. Whitmore, per our conversation, please prepare prescriptions for behavioral control medications. Vivian has been experiencing violent episodes. Mr. Ashford has authorized treatment but is currently traveling. Will pick up scripts Friday. CB. Mrs. Blackwell had requested the drugs before Vivian showed any symptoms. She'd manufactured the diagnosis to justify the prescription she'd already decided to obtain. Garrett, look at this. He came around the desk, reading over her shoulder. His jaw tightened as he processed the implication. She planned it. Before Isabel was even cold in the ground, Cordelia was planning to drug Vivian into submission. Keep looking. If she did this, there's more. Garrett opened the desk drawers systematically, finding nothing unusual until he reached the bottom drawer on the left. It was locked, which seemed redundant given that the entire office was locked. He used a letter opener to jimmy the mechanism, metal scraping against metal until something clicked. Inside was a smaller, locked box. Garrett broke that open too, past caring about property damage when his daughter's safety hung in the balance. The box contained a ledger that didn't match any of the official household accounts. This one was handwritten, entries dated and notated in Mrs. Blackwell's precise script. Each entry listed a withdrawal from something called the Ashford Special Needs Trust, amounts ranging from $15,000 to $25,000, frequency monthly, going back 48 months. The total, carefully summed at the bottom of the last page, $960,000. Garrett's hands shook as he held the ledger. I established a trust for Vivian's medical care after Isabel died. It was supposed to be used only for necessary treatments, therapies, specialists. The trustees were supposed to approve all expenditures. Who are the trustees? Myself and Cordelia. I thought having her as co-trustee made sense since she managed Vivian's day-to-day care and I was traveling so much. I trusted her to use the money appropriately. Thea flipped through the ledger, noting how the withdrawals increased after year 2. She's been embezzling, using Vivian's medical needs as cover to pay herself almost $1 million over 4 years. But what were the withdrawals for? Where's the money? They kept searching. In a manila envelope tucked behind the ledger, Thea found bank statements for an account in Mrs. Blackwell's name. Deposits matched the trust withdrawals exactly. Monthly notation on each deposit slip, special care compensation. There were also receipts from an offshore pharmacy in Belize, orders for medications that weren't available through regular channels in the United States. Arsenic trioxide, medical grade, ordered in small quantities over a 2-year period starting in 2020. The dates aligned with Isabel's cancer recurrence. Garrett held the receipts like they might burn him. She poisoned my wife, slowly, made it look like cancer coming back. Then after Isabel died, she drugged Vivian and stole from her trust fund, all while I paid her a salary and treated her like family. The question is why? $1 million is significant, but someone this methodical isn't doing this just for money. Thea found the answer in the very back of the locked box, a copy of Isabel's will. Most of it was standard: assets to Garrett, guardianship of Vivian, various bequests to charity. But there was a clause near the end that had been highlighted in yellow marker. To Cordelia Blackwell, who has served our family with dedication for 18 years, I bequeath the sum of $2 million and the cottage property in Southampton, with gratitude for her service. However, this bequest is contingent upon Cordelia remaining in the family's employ until Vivian reaches age 18. Should Cordelia leave or be dismissed for cause before that date, this bequest becomes void and the assets revert to the general estate. Beneath the printed text, someone had written in angry pen strokes, "Void if dismissed." She was going to fire me, needed to act. The handwriting matched the medical notes, Mrs. Blackwell's. She killed Isabel to prevent being fired, to protect a $2 million inheritance that she'd only get if she stayed employed for 15 more years. Then she drugged Vivian to create medical justifications that would let her steal from the trust. She built a perfect system. The worse Vivian got, the more money Mrs. Blackwell could claim for special care. And no one questioned her because she was the loyal housekeeper who'd sacrificed everything for the family. Garrett's face had gone beyond anger into something colder and more dangerous. He pulled out his phone, started taking photographs of every document, every receipt, every incriminating piece of paper they'd found. We take this to the police, tonight, right now. We show them everything and they arrest her for murder and embezzlement and child abuse. They'll arrest her, yes, but she'll make bail. She has money and no criminal record. Her lawyer will argue these documents were forged or taken out of context. The trial could take a year, and during that time she'll destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, build her defense. We need her to confess, on record, in a way she can't deny. How do we do that? Thea thought about her mother lying in a hospital bed, about Vivian learning that adults lied and promises meant nothing, about all the years Mrs. Blackwell had controlled this house through manipulation and violence disguised as care. The gala, tomorrow night, you're hosting your annual charity event, 200 guests, press coverage, everyone who matters in New York society. Mrs. Blackwell loves that event. She runs it, controls every detail, shines in the reflected glory of your family's philanthropy. You want to expose her publicly? In front of everyone? I want her to confess in front of witnesses she can't intimidate and cameras she can't avoid. She spent 4 years building this perfect crime, hiding behind respectability and loyal service. We burn that cover down where everyone can see. Garrett looked at the documents spread across Mrs. Blackwell's desk, evidence of betrayal by someone he'd trusted since childhood. She practically raised me. After my parents died, she was the only constant in my life. I called her Aunt Cordelia when I was young because she was more family than staff. She killed your wife and drugged your daughter. Whatever she was to you before, that's what she is now. He nodded slowly, resolve hardening. What do you need from me? Access to the security system. I need cameras installed in places Mrs. Blackwell doesn't expect them, and I need you to trust me when it's hardest to trust, when she's making it look like I'm the villain and she's the victim. After tonight, I'll never doubt you again. They spent the next hour setting up with Jenkins' help, installing miniature cameras in Vivian's playroom, the medicine cabinet, Mrs. Blackwell's office. The kind of surveillance that was probably illegal, but definitely necessary. Garrett made one more call before dawn, reaching out to a contact at the FBI's white-collar crime division. Someone he'd worked with years ago on a corporate fraud case, someone who owed him a favor. The agent listened to Garrett's explanation, asked pointed questions about evidence and jurisdiction, then agreed to send plainclothes operatives to the gala. They'd position themselves among the guests, waiting for probable cause to make an arrest. Not ideal from a legal standpoint, but when the alternative was letting a murderer walk free, protocol became flexible. At 5 in the morning, Thea finally went to check on Vivian. The little girl was sleeping peacefully. No nightmares for once. Her face relaxed in a way it never was when medicated. Thea sat on the edge of the bed, watching her breathe, making silent promises about protection and justice and breaking cycles of abuse. Vivian's eyes opened, focusing slowly on Thea's face. You came back. I told you I would. Mrs. Blackwell said you were arrested. She said you stole from us and tried to hurt your own mother, and Daddy sent you away forever. Thea brushed hair from Vivian's forehead, keeping her voice gentle. Mrs. Blackwell says a lot of things that aren't true. I'm here now, and I'm going to make sure you're safe. Do you trust me? Vivian considered this with the seriousness of someone whose trust had been broken too many times to give it easily. I want to, but everyone leaves. Not everyone. Some people stay, even when it's hard, even when someone tries to make them leave. I'm one of the staying people. Promise? It was the kind of promise that shouldn't be made lightly, the kind that bound you to another person's fate, whether convenient or not. Thea made it anyway. I promise. The gala preparations consumed the estate for the next 48 hours. Florists arrived with arrangements the size of small cars. Caterers transformed the industrial kitchen into organized chaos. The events coordinator directed staff with the precision of a military campaign. Every detail choreographed to reflect the Ashford family's impeccable taste and generosity. Mrs. Blackwell was in her element, directing operations with absolute authority. She wore a dove-gray suit that managed to look both elegant and severe, her silver hair pulled back in the tight bun that had become her signature. She moved through the house like she owned it, which in her mind she probably did after 20 years of managing every detail. She saw Thea in the hallway, and her expression flickered with something between surprise and calculation. "I thought you'd be in jail awaiting trial." Mr. Ashford posted bail. Turns out being innocent helps with that. Innocence is a matter of perspective. The evidence against you seems quite compelling. Thea kept her voice level, giving nothing away. Evidence can be manufactured, but the truth has a way of coming out, especially when people get careless. Mrs. Blackwell's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you threatening me, Miss Calloway?" "Just making an observation. You've built something impressive here, Mrs. Blackwell. 20 years of dedication, managing every aspect of this household. That must feel very secure, very permanent." "It is permanent. I'm family, in all the ways that matter. Mr. Ashford depends on me. He always has." People grow up, though. Start making their own decisions, trusting their own judgment. Must be scary when the child you raised doesn't need you anymore. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, something ugly showing through before control reasserted itself. "Mr. Ashford will always need me. Some bonds don't break." "We'll see." Thea walked away before Mrs. Blackwell could respond, feeling the housekeeper's gaze boring into her back like laser guidance systems looking for targets. The evening of the gala arrived with a kind of perfect weather that made Manhattan feel like someone else's city, temperate and beautiful, and willing to pretend its streets weren't filled with rats and garbage. Luxury cars lined the circular drive, delivering women in designer gowns and men in custom tuxedos, people for whom a $1,000 a plate charity dinner was a minor line item in discretionary spending. Thea dressed in a simple black server's uniform that one of the housekeepers found for her, pulling her hair back into a severe bun that made her look older and more invisible. She moved among the catering staff as they prepared for service, learning the choreography of high-end events where presentation mattered more than substance. Mrs. Blackwell swept through the kitchen, inspecting everything with eyes that caught details others missed. She paused when she saw Thea. "What are you doing in uniform?" "Helping. You're short-staffed, and I have serving experience. You're supposed to be with Vivian, keeping her calm before Mr. Ashford's speech." "Vivian is fine. I gave her dinner, and she's reading in her room. She'll be ready when you need her." Mrs. Blackwell's expression suggested she was recalculating something, adjusting for variables she hadn't anticipated. "Mr. Ashford plans to introduce Vivian to the guests during his speech. The child needs to look presentable, not overstimulated." "She'll look perfect. I'll make sure of it." By 7 o'clock, the ballroom was filled with 200 of Manhattan's elite, champagne flowing like water, conversation pitched at the volume that signaled people who knew they were important and wanted everyone else to know it too. Photographers moved through the crowd, documenting who attended, who wore what, who stood next to whom in the complex social calculus of wealth and influence. Garrett moved among his guests with practiced ease, shaking hands and accepting congratulations for the foundation's work, while looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. His eyes kept finding Thea across the room, silent communication passing between them. "Are you ready? Is this really happening? Can we pull this off?" She gave him a small nod. "Ready." At 8 o'clock, the master of ceremonies called everyone to attention. Garrett took the stage set up at the far end of the ballroom, a podium with the Ashford Foundation logo projected on the screen behind him. Applause rippled through the crowd, polite and sustained. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Your generosity supports programs that change lives, that give hope to families facing impossible challenges." His voice was strong, controlled, the CEO persona firmly in place. But Thea could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the podium a little too tightly. "For years, I thought I understood what it meant to face impossible challenges. I lost my wife Isabel to cancer 4 years ago, and I've been raising our daughter Vivian alone ever since. Or rather, not alone. I've had help from my trusted housekeeper, Mrs. Cordelia Blackwell, who has dedicated 20 years of her life to our family. Mrs. Blackwell stood at the side of the stage with Vivian, looking pleased and modest in equal measure. The little girl wore a white dress, her hair curled, looking like a porcelain doll designed to reflect her father's good taste and wealth. I thought I knew what dedication looked like, what loyalty meant, but recently I've learned that not everything is what it appears to be. The tone shifted. The audience sensed it, conversations dying as people focused on the stage with renewed attention. I'd like to show you something. The projection screen behind him changed from the foundation logo to hidden camera footage. The timestamp showed yesterday's date. The scene was Vivian's playroom. On screen, Mrs. Blackwell entered carrying a small silver tray. She approached Vivian with pills in a paper cup, but before administering them, she spoke in a voice the hidden microphone captured clearly. "Open, Vivian. Time for your medicine. The medicine that keeps you manageable, keeps you quiet, keeps you dependent on me because your father is too weak to raise you properly himself." The real Mrs. Blackwell's face went white. She took a step forward as if to stop the video, but Garrett raised a hand and security guards appeared from the shadows, blocking her path. The video continued. Mrs. Blackwell on screen crushed additional pills into juice, narrating her actions with the casual cruelty of someone who believed no one was listening. "A little extra today. Make sure you're drowsy for the photographer tomorrow. Can't have you acting out, making your father look bad. Not when there's money to be made from your special needs trust. Such a useful fund. Buy anything we need and call it medical care. Who's going to question the loyal housekeeper taking care of the damaged child?" Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Someone near the front row stood up. Phones came out, people recording this secondary disaster, even as they watched the primary one unfold on screen. Garrett's voice cut through the noise. "This woman has been drugging my daughter with antipsychotics and benzodiazepines since she was 3 years old, creating behavioral problems to justify medications that she used as chemical restraints, making Vivian sick so she could steal from a trust fund established for my daughter's care." The screen changed again. Bank statements appeared, withdrawal records, offshore pharmacy receipts. Each document was displayed long enough for anyone paying attention to understand what they were seeing. Mrs. Blackwell finally found her voice. "This is fabricated, computer-generated lies. Mr. Ashford has been under tremendous stress. He's not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in 4 years. Let's talk about my wife, Cordelia. Let's talk about how Isabel died so quickly after her cancer returned. After she told you she was going to fire you." The screen showed Isabel's letter, her handwriting enlarged so the entire room could read her fears, her concerns, her suspicion that something was wrong. Then came the arsenic receipts. Mrs. Blackwell lunged toward the stage, but security held her back. Her composure finally shattered completely, the mask of respectability falling away to reveal something desperate and cornered. "You ungrateful child, I raised you. After your parents died, I was the one who kept this family together. I sacrificed my entire life for the Ashfords, gave up everything to serve you, and this is how you repay me?" Her voice rose to a shriek that echoed off the ballroom's high ceilings. "That girl was destroying everything. Isabel was soft, weak. She would have ruined the family with her permissiveness. Someone had to be strong. Someone had to make hard choices." Garrett's voice was ice. "Hard choices like poisoning my wife? Like drugging my daughter? Like stealing almost $1 million while pretending to care for a child you saw as an inconvenience? Vivian needed structure, control. Without the medications, she was wild, unmanageable. I was helping her, helping you. Everything I did was for this family's good. You did it for money, for a $2 million inheritance you'd only get if you stayed employed until Vivian turned 18. You murdered my wife to protect that payout." Mrs. Blackwell's face contorted with rage. She broke free from the security guard holding her, grabbed Vivian's arm hard enough to make the child cry out. "This little monster ruined everything. She was supposed to stay medicated, stay compliant. Then that waitress showed up and started asking questions, interfering, turning you against me. Well, if I can't have my inheritance, neither of you get to keep her. She pulled Vivian toward the exit, moving with surprising speed for someone her age. The crowd parted in shock, no one quite processing what was happening fast enough to intervene. Thea moved faster. She'd been waiting for this, positioned herself near the exit Mrs. Blackwell would logically choose. When the older woman came through with Vivian in tow, Thea stepped into her path. "Let her go." Mrs. Blackwell's eyes were wild now, all pretense of civility abandoned. "Get out of my way, or I'll make sure you rot in prison for your mother's poisoning. You poisoned my mother, the same way you poisoned Isabel, slow-acting arsenic to make it look like natural causes. But you got sloppy. You were so focused on framing me that you didn't consider how a toxicology screen would expose you. Your mother was a means to an end, collateral damage to remove you from the equation. She should have died quietly in that county hospital instead of..." She didn't finish the sentence. Thea's hands shot out, breaking Mrs. Blackwell's grip on Vivian with a precision that came from nursing training, knowing exactly where pressure points lived and how to exploit them. The older woman stumbled back, thrown off balance. Vivian ran to Garrett, who had jumped off the stage and was crossing the ballroom at a sprint. He scooped his daughter into his arms, holding her like she might dissolve if he let go. FBI agents emerged from positions around the ballroom, moving with coordinated efficiency. One of them approached Mrs. Blackwell with handcuffs ready. "Cordelia Blackwell, you're under arrest for the murder of Isabel Ashford, attempted murder of Rosalind Calloway, child endangerment, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Mrs. Blackwell fought the handcuffs, screaming obscenities that shattered whatever remained of her respectable facade. The agent read her rights while flashbulbs went off, documenting every moment of her downfall for tomorrow's headlines. She turned her head toward Garrett one last time. "I loved you like my own son. I gave you everything. How can you do this to me?" Garrett's voice was quiet but carried across the silent ballroom. "You killed my wife and tortured my daughter. You were never family. You were just someone who worked here." They dragged her away, still screaming. The ballroom erupted in chaos, guests pulling out phones, calling lawyers and publicists and gossip columnists, already positioning themselves in relation to this scandal. Garrett stood in the center of it all, still holding Vivian, looking shell-shocked by what he'd just done. Thea made her way through the crowd to his side. Vivian looked up from her father's shoulder, eyes finding Thea. "Did you beat the witch?" Thea touched the child's back gently. "Yeah, kid, we beat the witch."